that the mind and body are distinct in kind, so that neither is reducible to or explicable in terms of the other, what is the relationship between them? Spinoza's response to this question is greatly different from what the majority of people believe. Most people believe that the mind and body interact with each other, that one can affect the other. It seems very obvious that a desire, which is in the mind, can cause the body to move. For example, the desire to, say, take a walk causes the body to walk, or the harmonious sound waves striking the ear can cause the mind to experience beauty. Nothing seems more obvious than that the mind can affect the body and vice versa. Nevertheless, Spinoza denies that any interaction can occur, and the basis for his denial is very straightforward. The common view which Spinoza rejects asserts 1. Mind and body are distinct in kind, and 2. Mind and body can interact with one another. It is easy to see that these two statements are inconsistent. That is, they cannot both be true. For if we assume that mind and body are distinct in kind, then they have nothing in common. For if they shared anything in common, they would not be distinct in kind. But if they have nothing in common, then they cannot possibly interact with one another. In other words, what it means to say that two things can interact is that something from one affects the other, and therefore that the two things must have in common the means by which they interact. But if they share in common the means by which they interact, then they cannot be distinct in kind. For example, when we perceive an external object, our body and the object interact. The same light that is reflected by the object enters our body through our eyes, and so that light is something that our body has in common with the external object. Our body and any external object are similar in kind. They are both made up of matter, and it is because of this that one can affect the other. But consciousness, or mind, we are supposing, is not made up of matter. It is distinct from matter and therefore has nothing in common with matter, and therefore cannot interact with matter. I do not wish to belabor the point, but so habituated are we to imagining that 1 and 2 above are both true, that the logic of this position is apt to be difficult to see through. Let us consider two physical objects, A and B, and let us suppose that A and B interact with each other. There must then be some means by which A and B interact. For example, they could interact through physical contact, gravitational attraction, electrical force, and so on. When this is analyzed according to physics, it is apparent that every interaction between any two objects, or any two physical objects, involves an exchange of energy, which energy is also physical, between the two objects. It is because A and B are both physical objects that they both have energy and have in common the energy that they exchange in order to interact. That is the very same energy that, say, leaves A is absorbed by B. But B is able to absorb this energy and hence to be affected by A. Only because B is of the same nature as A, that is to say, both are physical objects and energy is a defining characteristic of what it is to be a physical object. If we now suppose that A is physical and B is not physical, then how is it possible for A to affect B? For since B is not a physical object, it is not characterized by physical energy. If it were so characterized, it would be physical in nature, and hence it is not capable of being affected by A. Conversely, B cannot affect A, since the only means by which A can be affected is by absorbing or feeling some physical influence. But if B could produce something physical that could then be affected, that could then affect A, then B would itself have to be physical. Thus, summarizing, if two things have nothing in common, they cannot interact, because in order to interact, they would have to have in common the means by which they interact. According to Spinoza, mind and body are distinct in kind, which means they have nothing in common, which in turn means they cannot interact with one another. How then can we explain the fact that mind and body appear to affect one another? For it certainly does seem to be the case that I can move my body simply by willing my body to move, and that it is the mental willing that causes the physical motion of the body. If there is no causal connection between mind and body, then what is the explanation for the observed correlation between them? Spinoza holds that this observed correlation is to be explained in terms of a deeper underlying reality, namely God. The physical and the mental are qualitatively distinct aspects, attributes, in Spinoza's terminology, of God. Because they are qualitatively distinct, there can be no interaction between them. Because they are aspects of the same God, there will be correlations between them. I wish to present an analogy that I believe will assist the imagination in picturing what Spinoza has in mind. The analogy is meant to appeal to the imagination and hence must not be taken literally. Let us imagine, then, that God is standing in front of a large number of mirrors. Imagine further that each mirror is differently curved, so that God is reflected completely in each mirror. But since the mirrors are all different, the reflected images of God will all be different from one another. It is clear in this analogy that there can be no interaction between the different images of God, but yet there will certainly be correlations between the images, since the different images are reflections of the same God. Now, one of these complete reflections of God is the entire physical universe. The body of God, Spinoza calls the attribute of extension. Our body is the part of this attribute, or is a part of this attribute. Another is the entire mental universe, the mind of God, which Spinoza calls the attribute of thought. Our mind is a part of this attribute. The relation between the mind and the body is simply that they are different reflections of one and the same part of God. The human mind is a part of God, reflected in the mirror of thought. The human body is the very same part of God, but reflected in the mirror of extension. A note on terminology. The most basic distinction in Spinoza's metaphysical map is between independent being and dependent being. Spinoza uses the term substance or God when referring to the former, and mode or modification when referring to the latter. Any dependent being, such as a physical object or finite mind, depends on independent being. That is, it is included in the larger whole, that is God. So by referring to a given object as a mode of God, Spinoza explicitly reminds us of the dependency of the object on God. An attribute of God is a complete reflection of God. The being of God expresses itself, or manifests itself, in an infinite number of qualitatively distinct dimensions, each one of which is called an attribute of God. We humans are aware of only two, the physical, or extension, and the mental, or thought. Thus, in Spinoza's terminology, the human being is a mode of God. The human body is that mode of God expressed in the attribute of extension. The human mind is the same mode of God, but expressed or manifested in the attribute of thought. Let us now examine several consequences of our analogy. As we have already indicated, the reason why the mind cannot affect the body and vice versa is that the mind and the body are different mirror images of the same part or mode of God. An image that appears in one mirror cannot affect an image that appears in another mirror. The reason why mind and body are correlated with each other is because they are both images of the same mode of God. This correlation is a very general feature of Spinoza's system and is not limited only to human bodies and human minds. Every physical object must have some counterpart in the attribute of thought, because a physical object is a mode of God reflected in or manifested in the physical dimension. That same mode of God is also reflected in or manifested in the mental dimension. Thus, if we consider a given physical object, whether it be a table, a rock, or a star, or a magnetic field, that thing must have a counterpart or correlate in the attribute of thought. Spinoza refers to this correlate as the mind of the thing, or the idea of the thing. This is why Spinoza is often regarded as a pantheist. There is nothing in the physical world that is not associated with mind or consciousness.